This is TWiT.
This week, the FTC confirmed their investigation of the data privacy practices at Facebook. In the wake of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, the press first reported that Mark Zuckerberg would not testify before Congress and then reported that he would. Apparently, something convinced him he needed to be there. Joining us to discuss the ongoing war over our personal data a little bit more is investigative reporter Andy Kroll, who has been following the story for Mother Jones. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So at issue here is the report, of course, that Facebook turned over data of 50 million people and then it was misused. And then when Facebook found out, they asked the company to delete the data, but then they never followed up to confirm that Cambridge Analytica actually did delete it. Now, this is shocking to a lot of us, but it's actually not the first time Facebook has been investigated by the FTC. Can you tell us a little bit about the first time?
Yeah, if you go back, going on 7-8 years now, the data practices at Facebook and the ability to access the personal data of Facebook users was an issue for Facebook with the Federal Trade Commission. The ability to extract that data from Facebook and to, then slice it and dice it and use it however you liked became an issue at the company, and it led to this agreement with the FTC. I think this would have been about 7 years ago, that Facebook would give better disclosure, that it would be more transparent with regulators about how it was using and giving access to the vast amounts of data that we all put into Facebook by being users on the platform. And now that consent decree between Facebook and the FTC is coming back into play with these new revelations that Facebook, again, allowed outside users connected to Cambridge Analytica to get as much as 50 million profiles of Facebook users, the data on those profiles, and that Facebook did not do it, either did not disclose this properly and did not do a good enough job of tracking it down after the fact.
So I want to talk about your investigative piece, which everyone should go read at Mother Jones. Even if you think you know everything about this story, you don't. Yeah, I feel like now that we can't watch House of Cards, I'll just read this and call it a day.
So true. There's going to be a movie made about this at some point, guaranteed.
So tell us about Cambridge Analytica, like the stuff that we don't already know. Where did they get started, and what was their original mission?
Sure. So this story takes us back to about 2012, I think, is where I would start this story. And that is, you have a fellow over in London named Alexander Nix. He is working for a company called SCL. It's a British company. They're in public affairs. They have a defense/military division. But Alexander Nix is looking for a way into the American political market. This is a $10 billion booming industry, and this fellow with this British company is looking for his way in, and he sees his way in when Mitt Romney loses the presidential election in 2012, and one of the culprits is that the Republican Party is drastically trailing its Democratic opponents in the worlds of data and technology. And so Alexander Nix goes searching for a way to bring what he thinks is the cutting edge technology and advances in data to the Republican Party. He eventually links up with Robert and Rebecca Mercer, and these are two of the big mega donors in Republican politics. Robert Mercer, of course, pioneered the use of algorithms in hedge fund investing. And what Alexander Nix came to Robert Mercer and said is, hey, look, you know algorithms, you know big data. What I want to do is take some of those same approaches, and I want to apply algorithms, and I want to apply psychology to politics. And out of this meeting and out of this relationship, Cambridge Analytica is born. You can even see it in the name. You have Cambridge, which kind of stands for the old, wise universities of England, and then Analytica is a sort of James Bond-esque, futuristic, a phraseology, completely made up word, of course, but you combine those two, you get Cambridge Analytica. And as my story shows, Cambridge Analytica finds its way into American politics, preaching these cutting edge approaches to targeting voters, influencing voters, turning out voters. But there are real questions about whether Cambridge Analytica's success, or whether it actually worked, what it was pitching, or whether it was just good at convincing people with a lot of money to underwrite this company.
Yeah, it's really fascinating reading through the entire story and the timeline of events. And I feel like because we were talking earlier in this show, Cambridge Analytica and everything that's happening with Facebook, it's a very complicated, complex story. You have to understand a little bit about how online marketing works. You have to understand a little bit about how how data is being used to drive elections or leading up to an election to kind of understand voters and all that kind of stuff. In 2015, The Guardian had posted about Ted Cruz's presidential campaign, which you point out in the article. Ted Cruz was kind of an early user of Cambridge Analytica's data to this degree and to this level. Ultimately didn't work out so well for him. But The Guardian had posted about this in 2015. And then, of course, in 2016, shortly after President Trump was elected, in the New York Times, there was also a piece that kind of detailed how these machinations were happening behind the scenes. Why was there, I mean, it seems like we knew a lot then, and a lot of this similar information that we know now. What's different now that has regulators kind of focused in on Facebook at this point, where they weren't prior? I mean, we knew this information then. What's different?
We did know this information, and I'm glad that you noted that December 2015 Guardian story. In retrospect, that Guardian story looks prophetic.
Yes.
And was in some way to use a cliche, the canary in the coal mine. That really, I mean, I kept coming back to the story myself in my reporting. And I think in that moment, I mean, Facebook supposedly went to the Cruz campaign and went to Cambridge Analytica and the other players involved with this data question after that story came out, and very quietly, privately said, this is a problem. You need to delete this data. You need to take care of this. Now, Facebook didn't seem to go too far out of its way to verify that when the players involved said the data was deleted, that it actually was. But I do think Facebook grasped the magnitude, or part of the magnitude, of what had happened and what the larger ramifications of that could be with that December 2015 story. But they kept it quiet, as did the campaigns and the other people involved. And in a way, it kind of happened that the story happened. There was a little flurry of information, and then it receded. And I really don't think it was until we had Christopher Wiley, the former Cambridge Analytica early employee, right there in the thick of all of the discussions and activities about how this trove of Facebook data was procured, until he really went public just in the last couple of weeks, when this whole thing blew up, that we understood the magnitude of it. We understood why that data was so important, that personal Facebook data was so important to Cambridge Analytica, and what they had intended to do with it. We did not have I don't think we had the full picture of what was going on there. And I also think that in the ensuing years since that Guardian story came out, there has just been a growing, broader awareness of Facebook has all this data. Facebook monetizes all this data. This is Facebook's business model, and just the general issues of privacy and those of us who use Facebook, Twitter, Google, what we've opted into. I just think the awareness of that has grown to the point that when Christopher Wiley went public with all this information, the reception, it was an explosion, and sent Facebook stock tumbling, the FTC investigating. There were a lot of things building up to this, I think.
What surprised me as well was you write about the 2016 conference, the Concordia Annual Summit in Manhattan, which you describe as TED meets Davos. And you talk about how Alexander Nick spoke at that conference and talked a little bit about this. This is, of course, after the 2015 article, but your description just makes me think like he's like, you can't believe what we can do with this data. I mean, he talks about how they know if people are very low in neuroticism or quite or openness or slightly conscientious. And I mean, there are important people at this event. I mean, you talk about speakers like Kristen Gillibrand and Madeleine Albright. Like, I can't imagine Madeleine Albright sitting there listening to him talk, I mean, presumably she just gave her talk and left and didn't listen to him, but and not say like, what? Like they have this data that can tell if I'm neurotic and then target ads at me, perhaps political ads. Like no one questioned it then?
No one questioned it then. In fact, what was amazing about that speech was it was really it wasn't exactly the high watermark for Alexander Nixon, Cambridge Analytica. I would say that Trump's election, in which Cambridge Analytica took credit for it and said that they were integral and instrumental and so on, that was probably the high watermark. But that speech was really a sort of public emergence that we hadn't seen of Alexander Nixon and Cambridge Analytica, and this model, this approach that he was talking about. And just so that your viewers, your subscribers understand, Cambridge Analytica pitched what it called behavioral micro-targeting. It talked about psychographics. That's all fancy terminology for saying we're going to use all the data that campaigns already have, your shopping data, your demographics, your voting data, all the stuff that's out there already that Clinton used and Obama used in 2012. But we're going to marry that data with information about your personality. And this is where the Facebook data came in. Cambridge used the Facebook data to craft these personality profiles. And so Cambridge was saying, we're better than the other guys out there because we have all these profiles, 230 profiles on 230 million Americans, the entire voting age population. And we know which people are neurotic, which people are agreeable, which ones are fun-loving, which ones are leaders, and which ones are followers. And we can target and persuade people even better when we know that about them. And at this Concordia Summit, you have Alexander Nixon really selling and this is the pure, straight, unadulterated vision of his company. And at that point, everyone bought it. And it was the hot new thing. Wired magazine, love them as I do, listed him as one of the 25 geniuses who are creating the future of business. He was on top of the business at that point. And it really isn't until after the 2016 presidential election ends, and that there is a mass of people in Republican politics who are raising questions more vocally than ever, that questions are asked and doubts start to creep in about, okay, this guy, when he was on stage, is this legit or is this more salesmanship than substance?
Yeah, I think what's depressing about all of this is that, by and large, this is just how the online marketing industry works. And for a certain amount of time, up until the last couple of weeks, let's say, it worked this certain way. And then we realized that, hey, it just got a little too good. And there was also a lot of dishonesty behind the scenes. Obviously, that's a really big part of this too. But I mean, peeling all of that away, like this is just how it's been for years. And we've known it's scummy, and yet we still seem to be okay with giving all of this information away for something, for use of the service or whatever. So, I mean, in some ways, I guess we're just as culpable as anyone else for being okay with giving that information to begin with.
But this moment is certainly I think a watershed moment and a teachable moment for a lot of people. I mean, people that are professionals, my mother, I mean, everyone I know who's on Facebook, who's on Twitter. I mean, I was having a conversation the other day with someone, and it had just occurred to this friend of mine that all the free services that you get through Google, Gmail, Docs, Sheets, Drive, all of that all feeds data back into Google that Google uses in not just to improve its services, but in other commercial ways as well. I mean, we are so accustomed to these free platforms, these free online tools, and just using them and not really just diving in and not really thinking twice about it. And yet I do think that this moment, though, has really snapped people's heads back and caused a lot of folks to say, okay, what am I opting into here, and where is my information going, and is it going to go somewhere that I don't want it to and that I don't agree with?
And is it going to go somewhere that the company itself doesn't even know where it's going? That's what I'm more afraid of. Like, I don't necessarily think Facebook or Google are the enemy here. I think they've just lost control of it a little bit. They've opened Pandora's box, like to use a cliche, and I don't think all that toothpaste isn't going to go back in the tube.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't think so either. And there was a former Facebook employee who submitted evidence to the committee in Parliament that's investigating all of this, the committee that Christopher Wiley testified before yesterday, I believe it was. And this former Facebook employee said, look, I mean, there are tens of thousands of people who use the tools on the data tools on Facebook between whatever it was, 2010 to 2013, 14, where you could go in, you could just create a quiz, you could create a game, you could create some sort of app. And with that app, you could extract not just data on the people who played your game or took your quiz, but their friends as well. And I mean, it's the thing that struck me too about the story was thinking about Facebook in years past. I mean, 2009 was not, relatively speaking, that long ago, but Facebook was an entirely different beast back then. And the amount of data that you could pull off and the amount of things that you could put into Facebook have changed so radically. And while Facebook has tightened a lot of that, mostly for its own self-interested purposes because it's been able to monetize that data, I mean, you can't claw that data back, as you point out. I mean, that data is going to be floating around and used for a long time, and there's nothing we can do about it. I mean, we're seeing it now with Cambridge Analytica, but that's just one company out of thousands that made use of this data. And so our personal data is out there. It's going to be out there. It's something we just have to resign ourselves to at this point, unfortunately.
Andy Kroll is an investigative reporter for Mother Jones. He is also on Twitter at Andy Kroll with the K. Thank you so much for joining us, Andy.
Thank you, Andy.
And my pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.
It was a pleasure talking with you.